Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ChMC Masterclass digital event. My name is Natasha and I am an events delivery coordinator at the CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to David to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can throughout the event and during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David, ChMC Assessment Manager at the CMI, to begin the event.
Brilliant, thanks Natasha, and welcome everybody to this morning's webinar. What I want to do first is to take you through some information about the Chartered Management Consultant Award and look at where we've come from, and then take you through the assessment process itself, and then we're going to open up to the panel to answer some of your questions. So I guess the first question is, why Chartered Management Consultant? Why have we devised this in the first place? Well, management consultancy, it was felt, had a number of challenges. There was some inconsistency across professional standards, and the profession had a number of issues around how do we make that consistency clear to the customers, to the clients, and how do we generate quality and measure quality across the working environment. It enables clients to make informed buying decisions, not based just on price or time, but on value and quality as well. So that price quality triangle. You know, you can have it quick, but it's not going to be cheap. You can have it cheap, but it's not going to be quality. And we wanted to make sure that the quality was there, and that having the status enables people to say, right, I see you've got this status. I recognize the quality that brings, and I recognize the recognition that brings for the individual. And that gives me a lot more confidence when I'm buying services and engaging with a consultant. We wanted to make sure that we could attract and retain the best talent possible. And having this recognition, we believe, enables people to bring their best to this and demonstrate their best. And it's a standard by which their best practice can be recognized across the environment as well. And it's also about building a sustainable and interactive community of those chartered management consultants, where they can share experience, they can share knowledge and talk to each other across from places across the industry, so that you're getting that mix of ideas, that mix of experience, irrespective of what particular environment they're working in. So that was the reason that it was set up in the first place. And then we think about what does it involve, and what does it mean to be a chartered management consultant? Well, CMI were appointed by the Privy Council as the awarding body for chartered management consultants. So we measure and deliver the status to people who meet the criteria. But we didn't do it alone. It was developed in partnership with the MCA, and with a number of firms were involved in the original pilot phase as well. And that was really useful, because it wasn't just us and the MCA as awarding bodies and industry bodies sitting there saying this is what we need. It was really developed with the aid of those firms saying, well, this is what we're seeing, this is what we think we want, this is what the industry wants, this is what our stakeholders and clients are telling us they want, which gave us a really strong foundation on which to measure the quality, and a foundation that is consistent across the piece, irrespective of a particular specialism that somebody might be working in. It meant professional recognition of that high standard, of that consistency. It says that anybody who's got this status can do things, and they can repeat those things to a quality, to an ethical standard, in a way that makes a real difference and adds value. It also called on the individuals to have a period of self-reflection as well. And I'll talk about that a bit more as we go through the assessment process. Now, one really important thing to remember is this is a professional status. This isn't a qualification. It's almost a qualification type experience going through it. You have to do a submission. You have to go through a professional discussion to check your submission, to prove what you've said. And again, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But this is a professional status. And it's also important to remember that this professional status is a level 7 equivalent. So anybody who achieves this is operating at a level similar to you would at a master's. Now that's really important, because that tells you the kind of thing we're looking for, tells you the kind of experience we're looking for, the kind of responses we're looking for when we take you through that assessment process. And I think it's really helpful to bear that in mind. Now, it's also really important to remember this is based on real life and real experience, real practice. So we're not looking for theoretical evidence. We're not looking for academic evidence or academic responses to the challenges that we make to you in the professional discussion. We're looking to see how you have done things really, how you've really made a difference, why you've done those things, how you've done those things, and what you've brought to the client over and above any of your colleagues who are not chartered management consultants. So it's really important to bear that in mind as you go through the process. This is real life, real time. And I often say, one thing you need to remember is you are the pitch. Come to it in that mind. This is also being recognised in government, and we have Cabinet Office representatives sit on the ChMC Oversight Board. And that's really useful as well, because as you're no doubt aware, the government will get involved in consulting for lots of pieces of the work they do, and having them recognise this recognition is really fantastic for everybody involved in this, everybody who's achieved the status already. There are a number of firms currently involved, and a lot of these have been involved from the beginning. I'm not going to read out all these. I'll let you scan through this and see who's involved, but I think this gives you some idea of how important this is and how much value is being given to this across the industry as a whole, and how this status is recognized, and how, if you achieve this status, it really ups your profile in the world of management consulting. It really ups your profile when you're dealing with clients and stakeholders and customers. And it really does say, I'm operating at a particular level. I do things well. I can repeat those things. I do them across the board. I act with ethics. I reflect on my own performance. I reflect on my own behavior. And I bring the best of me to every engagement I have with a client. And that status really screams out loud to all the clients involved here. We've obviously done some assessment of how it's worked out and how it's being seen in the marketplace. And here's some really interesting numbers for you. 98% of those involved say it demonstrates integrity and commitment to ethics. Now, we think that's a really important thing to do, because when you're dealing with stakeholders and when you're dealing with clients, one of the biggest issues is the ethical questions. How do I know you're doing this for my benefit, and how do I know you're not doing this just for the money or for some other reason? So those ethics and integrity are really important. 82% of those people that went through the process found it challenging, very challenging in certain cases. And I'm going to stand behind that, because we think that's really important. As I said, this is a level 7 equivalent status, not a qualification, professional status. And it's really important that it is challenging, and getting it is rewarding and really makes a difference and means a lot to those of us that have gone through the process and those of us that have achieved the status already. So I think that's really important and really good feedback from everybody we've spoken to. Now, there's a big impact of becoming ChMC, achieving that status, and 85% of people that have said it increased their self-awareness. And we think that comes from the reflection piece that goes in there. And this, one of the things that's come along with that is people have said, what's really useful going through this is having that opportunity to reflect. So many of us in a busy world nowadays often don't have time to stop and stare, do we? We're going from one engagement to another, from another to another to another. We're dealing with clients from meeting to meeting. We've got hundreds of things going on in our head, and we're trying to focus. And once we're done, we're on to the next. So we don't often get that opportunity to reflect. And I know I've spoken to lots of consultants that have been through this, and they've said that's been a real bonus for them, a real benefit for them. It also increases self-confidence, because those of us that have been working for a long time in this industry, you can forget how good you are. And this is a real opportunity to prove to yourself, as well as everybody else, how good you are at what you do, and how much of a difference you make and how you add value to the industry as a whole. And 81% of the people that we spoke to said they would promote this to their friends and family and recommend it to friends and family. And for me, the Net Promoter Score is one of the best things you can do, because if I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to tell anybody else. I'm not going to tell them to go through this because it's a worthwhile process. So I think if you're not already engaged in the process, you can see from all of this that it's a really worthwhile thing to do. Now, when we think about going to try and achieve the Chartered Management Consultant status, there are a number of pathways which you can do this. Primarily, there are two routes, but one of the routes splits into two in the way that we get there. So the two routes are what we call an on-program route. And this is where you're coming off the back of in-house training or external training, you've got 5 years experience as a management consultant. And I stress that, as a management consultant. And you can go for the status by which we call the on-program route. And I'll give you a bit more detail about that as we go through the webinar this morning. And you can get that through either an in-house accredited program. So if you're working in a firm and your firm is putting you through a training program, when you get to the end of that training program, providing you've got that 5 years experience, that you can demonstrate 5 years experience as a consultant, a management consultant, you can go through for the status on that basis. You can also go through to that stage if you've come off the back of a professional consulting qualification. So if you're independent, say, or in a smaller firm that doesn't have an in-house accredited program, but you've been through that professional consulting qualification route, that will get you to the point where you can apply for the status as well. Now, the other route is what we call the experienced professional route. And for the experienced professional, you have to have 7 years plus experience in operating as a management consultant. And that will get you to the point where you can start to apply and start to go through the assessment process. So there's 2 routes there, but 2 routes to one of those drivers. So the on-program assessment, once you're ready for the on-program assessment, you will submit your submission. And first of all, we ask you to submit a written submission. I'll go into more detail as we go through this. The submission is then reviewed by one of my expert assessors, and they will decide whether they will take you on from that basis onto the professional discussion. And the professional discussion is a virtual professional discussion between you and the assessor. That evidence is your evidence that you submit has to be corroborated by a nominated sponsor. And the sponsor has to be somebody who is either your line manager, a senior manager if you're working in a firm, and if you're not working in a firm, a peer or a mentor, coach that you may have in your network who can substantially validate that what you're saying in your evidence is true, that you are a good and proper person, that you are ethical, that you have the 5 or 7 years experience in that field. They have to state that in your submission to validate that your submission meets those criteria, and then we will go through it in more detail. The application that you put through is moderated, so everything that the assessor does is then checked again by a moderator to say yes, we agree, or no, we don't agree, and you will receive or miss the status on that basis. We then inform you of the outcome, and if your outcome is successful, you're then able to use the designated letters after your name and refer to yourself as a chartered management consultant from that point on. And we'll talk a bit more about that in detail as we go through. So the experienced professionals, if you're coming through this as an experienced professional, you need to have a good professional standing, and you have to be able to demonstrate your ethical position, your ethical behavior, and how you've added value to working with your clients, and how you've added value to working with your stakeholders and the firm if you're part of a firm as well. So we're demonstrating that prolonged performance above what is expected by a newly appointed management consultant or a newly appointed chartered management consultant if they've come through the level, on-program route. Whichever route you come through, you need to demonstrate your core knowledge and your core skills and how you've made that difference. Again, I keep saying this, but it is real world, it's not academic. So how have you made a difference to your stakeholders, your clients, your customers? All of that is really, really important. Real world stuff. This is not an academic qualification. You need to demonstrate your ongoing skills and knowledge, and you need to think about how you're going to maintain your ongoing skills and knowledge after you've achieved the status. So we do look very much at the continuous professional development element of this. And if you achieve the status every year, we may come to you and say, we want to see your CPD record. We want to see how you've continued to develop in the last 12 months and what you plan to do in the next 12 months as well. Because CPD is not only about looking back, it's about looking forward, taking that time to reflect what worked, what didn't work, what am I going to do different, how am I going to stay on top of everything that I need to stay off as we move forward and the industry moves forward and I don't get left behind. So let's all that said, there's a lot of detail there, and we'll answer your questions in more detail as we go through. If you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat box. Let's have a look now at how the assessment itself actually works and what we're looking at. So there is a competency framework, and the competency framework has 4 elements. The first element is values, ethics, and behavior. So how are you behaving? How are you seen by your peers? How are you demonstrating that you have an ethical basis on which you're working? We ask you questions about that. We ask you to prove evidence about that. Then we look at leadership and management. How are you managing yourself? How are you managing others? How are you managing with change? All of those issues. Then we look at your client operating environment. How are you interacting with your clients, and how are you bringing value across the piece that you're working with? Will your client stand up and say, I'm going to engage with a consultant. I really want to engage with you because you do these things for me and you make a real difference, and that's demonstrable difference. And then we look at the personal and professional development. So as I say, what am I going to do to stay in touch? What am I going to do to keep my skills up to date? What have I done in the last 12 months as a reflective look? So looking backwards, looking forwards. Now, it's really important that when you submit evidence for this, the evidence is aligned to the criteria. We're not looking for fluff and weight here. We're only looking for evidence that meets the criteria. And we're looking for evidence that relates to you as an individual. We know what your organization does in terms of training. We know how good your firm is. We sometimes know how good you are as an independent because we can look into that sort of thing on LinkedIn, for example, and your web pages and all the rest of it. But what we want to know is you. What about you? What difference did you make? We're not assessing your organization. We're not assessing your organization's training package. We're assessing you as an individual. Now, for a lot of us, this is really difficult to do. This is the hardest thing we do. We're brought up thinking about, we have to talk about we have to talk about we have to talk about the team, we have to talk about us. But all through this process, what we need to look at is you. So I want you to think I, we. I have a phrase, I, Captain. We think about, what have you done? Tell me about you, not anything else. There's some guiding principles that I always think about when we're thinking about assessment and when we're thinking about getting people to prove their status. And these are really good principles when you're looking at evidence as well. And there's 2 sets of this. There's the 6 serving men, Kipling's 6 serving men. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And if you think about those 6 elements in anything you do, it starts to give you a lot more clarity, I think. And I use this all over the place, not just in work. But what am I doing? Why am I doing it? When and how did I do that? Who did I do it for? Where did I do that? What difference did it make? Why did it make a difference? So we start to think about those things. We have a lot more clarity in the submission that we're putting through to be assessed. You can also think about the STAR technique. So when did you do something? What was the situation? What was the task that you undertook? What action did you take in order to achieve that? And what was the result? Now, we all know that not all results are successful, especially if you're working with clients and you're working in engagement that may not be successful, may not deliver what it's set out to do. That's not a problem. You can still include that evidence if it meets the criteria. And at the end of it, you can say, at the end of this, it wasn't successful. However, what I learned from that as an individual was X, Y, and Z. What I learned I wouldn't do again, or what we understood went wrong, all the learning that takes place from that. Not every engagement has to be successful in terms of providing evidence. And especially when we're thinking about our own development, it's good to look back and say, yeah, that really worked. I'd repeat that. That didn't. I'm going to do something different in future. I'm going to change the way that I deliver that. So you do submit your evidence, and we look at it in a number of ways, and we use what's called VACs. So is the evidence valid? Does it relate to the competencies, or is it just there to add to weight? Now, one of the things you need to think about this is we give you a submission form that has very limited word count on it, and I make no excuses for that. We do that for a reason. One is that we don't want you submitting everything you've ever done. We want to see the best of you. We want to see the best of you that relates to the competencies and the criteria. The other thing is that conciseness is a professional skill. And if you're delivering something to a client, and the client says, I want an interim report, please. We've got 10 minutes at the at the board meeting, I'd like you to give us an interim report. If you go in with a whole box full of stuff, you're not going to get very far. You need to go in with 2 sides of A4 that gives you the ABC of communication. It's accurate, it's brief, and it's concise. And that's what we're looking for here, because we believe that that is a particular skill that we should all have at the level at which we're operating. We need to make sure that the evidence is authentic. So you're only submitting evidence that relates to your performance, not to the training program, not to somebody else's performance. That it's genuine and genuinely relates to you. Now, if you fall into the trap of using evidence that doesn't relate to you, this will become very clear at professional discussion, because you won't be able to back it up. We can all write a good story, but can we talk the talk behind it? So think about that. Don't get sucked into that trap. It's very easy to do that. We look to see that the evidence is current, and current means relating to current knowledge and skills that you are using and demonstrating at the moment. Now, we all have skills in the past that we've used and we've demonstrated. And as an example, my first degree was in IT applications. But that's so far out of date now. I haven't done anything with it for years. And if I start putting evidence that says I'm using this when I'm not, that will soon become very clear as well. So use evidence from the past, providing you're still demonstrating those skills and behaviors and knowledge now. If you're not, don't be tempted to use it. It's not adding anything, and it's not going to help your submission. And the last thing we need to think about is sufficient. So when you're collecting your evidence, is there sufficient evidence for one of my assessors to make a decision? If there isn't, they will send it back to you. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But make sure there's sufficient evidence for them to make a decision. I always say to people, make it easy for your assessor to say, yes, we're going to move you on to the next stage. Make it as easy as possible for them to say, yes. Important to remember that, and useful to keep that in mind when you're compiling evidence. So look at what we're looking at. Look at the evidence you're going to submit. Let's think about how that ties in with everything else. So the stage 1 is the written submission. We ask you to do that on all the basis that I've talked about so far, and you do that either after 7 years or after the 5 years. Then stage 2 is a professional discussion, and then the ongoing element of it, every time you renew your status, is the continuous professional development. Now, that is really important. I've talked about that quite a lot already this morning, but if we ask you for your CPD record and you're unable to provide it, that raises red flags. So it's really important that you maintain your CPD record and you're able to demonstrate that you have been doing things and you have something planned in mind as well to do for the next 12 months. And we will check in on that and see how you're getting on with that. And again, I stand by that because I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to do. So some key points for you here as an interim. It's about the difference that you make, not the difference your firm makes, about you. Why should you be given ChMC status? Why should you be awarded that status? Would your submission make sense to somebody who doesn't know what you do? And that's a really important question, because we can get trapped in the trees here. We write in jargon that we use every day. We write things that are clear to us and clear to the people that we work with. But would somebody who doesn't know what you do make sense of your evidence? Remember, it's about quality and not quantity. We're not looking for weight here. We're looking for the ABC, keep it accurate, brief, and concise. And this will get you your ticket to the dance. And we'll talk about the dance in a minute. So all the things I talked about, why should I be awarded ChMC status? What difference have I made? How have I made a difference? Where have I made that difference? Think about the 6 serving men here. When did I make the difference? And who have I made a difference for who agrees that I've actually made a difference? Because we can all say, I made a huge difference. And we talk to clients and they go, no, that's not right. So don't get fooled into that position as well. Be very clear that the evidence you submit in the written submission meets those VAX criteria. It's valid, it's accurate, it's current, and it's sufficient. So when you're gathering your evidence, and this is where a lot of you will be at the moment, because you're coming on to this from a different point of view that some of your earlier colleagues would have done. So we're gathering evidence, and we think about 4 elements of gathering your evidence. I would suggest you collect as much evidence as you can. Then select the evidence. Select the evidence that says the best about you in line with the criteria. Not just the best about you if it doesn't meet the criteria. If it's not valid, then it can be the loveliest thing that we've ever read about you, but how does it align to the criteria in order that we can make those assessments about you? So collect it, select the best of it, connect it to the evidence, and then reflect on it and think about, why have I got that in there? Is that going to explain the best about me? Can I stand up when I'm challenged on that and talk about that evidence and talk about why it's in there, how it relates to me, and how it meets the competencies? All these things are very, very important to bear in mind. We don't just want weight in there. So once you've done that and we've agreed that that meets the criteria, or we haven't, and if we haven't, we will send it back to you and ask for more evidence. Once we get to the point where we're going to take you on to the professional discussion, that's where we come on to stage 2. The professional discussion is done virtually. First preference would be digital, so we can see each other, because we pick up a lot of NVCs by seeing each other, and we can see that it's you. You are the right person who should be there, and you're the right person who's entitled to be there. So be prepared to have some evidence of who you are, your driving license, your passport, your employee's ID card, whatever it might be, but we will ask you to show some evidence that it's you. It will last approximately an hour. We say approximately an hour because that's going to be somewhere between at least 50 minutes to an hour, 10, hour and a quarter. Now we have that flexibility because we want to get the best out of you. We don't want to have an artificial time frame that says we will keep you talking for an hour if we get what we need from you in 55 minutes. Having said that, if we haven't got what we need from you, we may take you on over that hour. There is a cutoff because we don't want you to just talk for the sake of it if it's not achieving anything. But we will want you to focus on that and give you enough time to do that appropriately. The professional discussion is about validating the evidence in your submission. As I say, we can all talk a good talk, but can we walk the walk as well? Can we back that up? And this is where, if anything you've put in there doesn't relate to you, it will become very, very clear to my assessors that you're not the person you say you are in your written submission. So be honest as possible in your written submission. And we will also, part of that discussion of competencies is related to the CPD as well. So how are you going to do that? And you will be questioned about that live, as well as asked to provide evidence about that in your written submission. And we will also question you on ethics. So be prepared to answer questions about ethics. And when I say questions, this will be a discussion, not a Q&A. This is very much not a Q&A. This is a professional discussion between two professional peers. So be prepared to justify your ethics because you will be challenged on those. And you will be challenged on examples of where your ethics have been challenged. Not just, well, this is what I would do. Tell me something you've actually done. Tell me somewhere where you've made a difference. What was the outcome of your ethical stance? Was it positive? Was it negative? Did you change the view of the people around you? Or did you find you had to stop dealing with them? So all those kinds of things will be challenging, and we'll be investigating further. So it isn't a Q&A. As I say, it's a real discussion. It's not academic. We're looking for real evidence. We're not trying to catch you up, or catch you out rather. There are no tricks in there. There are no sneaky bits in there. You're not going to be asked to do anything that we wouldn't ask any other professional at this level to do. You can fail it. It is a pass or fail. You get one go at this. So make sure that you turn up. Make sure you leave enough time in your day. Don't try and fit in an hour between other meetings because you won't be doing yourself any justice. It will put you under unnecessary pressure, and that will likely lead to you not achieving. So make sure you've got enough time. Treat this as really important. Treat this as a key client in the day. Now I say make sure you turn up, and what do I mean by that? Well, everybody turns up physically. We've not had anybody yet not turn up physically. But sometimes people turn up and they're not really there. Their mind's elsewhere. They're trying to do other things. They're looking at other things. They're not taking it as seriously as they should do. And those people, by and large, fail. So my advice is turn up. Make sure you turn up. Bring your whole self to that hour and a bit. Make sure you leave enough time. Otherwise, you're not going to give yourself the best opportunity. Be a consultant in that interaction. So act as a consultant, talk as a consultant. This isn't an academic thing. Think about what I said about I Captain. It's all about me, all about me. I want to tell you about me, and I want to know about you. And one question I think is really important to say, if you were on the other side of this, and you were reflecting on your performance in that professional discussion, would you give yourself a status, and why? And if not, why not? because I think that's really important to do. And again, we don't always have time to reflect, but this is a real opportunity. This is some time for you carved out for you to reflect, for you to demonstrate the best of you that you bring to this environment. Now, one of the things I always say to people is think about this, think about the ethical test. If you were in front of your best client, would they believe what you were saying? Would they want to see what you're saying? What would your friends and family think if they saw the recording of this professional discussion? How does it feel to you in terms of a gut feeling? And how would you feel if what you're doing in the professional discussion turned up on the front page news tomorrow? Would you be proud or would you be ashamed? These are the things you need to ask yourself before you go into the professional discussion. Are you ready to stand by all of this and make sure you give the best of you possible? We're not out to trick you. We're not out to catch you out. There's nothing like that going on. We want you to succeed, and we're not going to waste our time or yours. If we don't think you can achieve this through the professional discussion, we won't take you there. We won't, that's not what this is about. We will send the evidence back to you and say, you're not ready. You need to give us more. Or in some cases, actually, this isn't the best route for you. You need to take more time and come back to this a bit later on. We're not about wasting anybody's time here. So some key points about that: turn up, make sure you turn up, take it seriously. Think of us as your main client in that moment, in that interaction. What would you do with your main client? That's what we want. This isn't given. This isn't grandfathering people in. It doesn't matter how long someone's been in an organization. It doesn't matter how high they are in the organization. It's about what difference they've made, not where they are, not their title, what difference that they've made to the consulting arena and to clients and stakeholders. Now, I've mentioned about getting things sent back. Now, we have a process with the written submission that we refer evidence back to you. If there isn't enough evidence for us to make a decision on, so is it sufficient? Sometimes no. We will send that back to you and say, we want more evidence. You will get a resubmission document, which again limits the words that you can put on this. So we're not allowing you to send us your thesis if you don't get through on the first go. We will send it back and ask for more evidence. Now, if you get referred, don't think of that as a bad thing. You get 3 chances to get your submission right, and it is an opportunity to polish what you've done already and make it really shine to get to that professional discussion. So don't take it as a bad thing necessarily. Now, that said, you get 3 goes at that. So if you get to your 3rd one and it gets referred, you're not going to go any further, I'm afraid. So think about that in terms of when you submit. Am I ready to submit? Have I got the evidence I need? Can I stand by this? Can I stand up and justify what I'm saying? Should I get the ChMC status? Ask yourself all those questions. So when you submit it, you're ready. You're submitting at the best time. You're submitting the best evidence about you in order that we can have the best go at getting you to that status. Now, one thing you need to be aware of, there are confidentiality rules. Now, if your first submission, or any of your submissions for that matter, break the confidentiality rules, the system is set up that we hit a button, you will get a notification saying your submission breaks the confidentiality rules and it has been deleted from the system, and you will have to resubmit in an anonymized version. Now, that resubmission is your second go. So please, 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 before you submit, make sure that your submission meets the confidentiality rules, that we don't know who you're working for. We can't identify an individual. So we don't want to hear that you're working for Barclays and reporting to Mr. Smith. We want to hear that you're working in the banking industry, you're working in the finance sector, reporting to a senior manager. We don't need to know who it is. It doesn't add anything to the submission. We don't take a halo effect on that and say, oh, well, that must be good then if you're working for them. We will send it back to you. And that's 1 go out of 3 gone. So make sure you don't fall into that trap. So final thing I want to say really is do treat this as a real pitch. On this occasion, you are the engagement. Bring your whole self to it. Come fully prepared to do it. We want to see the best of you, not your firm, not your team, not people that you work with. This is all about you. Take that and you won't go far wrong. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to go back now and talk to some colleagues. And joining us today, we're really, really pleased to have joining us today, Alex Luck from KPMG. And Alex has come through, Alex has been awarded the status and did that through the applied level 3 route, which is the off the 5 years. And also joining us this morning, very pleased to have with us Lisa Moore from Arup. And Lisa, on the other hand, came through the process through the experienced professional route, which is, so we've got people coming from both sides on this. Good morning. Welcome. I'm glad you're joining us today. And I'm sure everybody watching will be glad to learn from your experience. So what I think I'd like us to think about first is going through the assessment process and thinking about how we started that off. What would you say is the most challenging thing about the written submission?
I'm happy to take that one first. I think for me, it was the word count limit and the openness of the templates. There's a lot of free text boxes with that you have to kind of complete. And I think particularly the part that I found most challenging was the second question, which asks you about your impact as a management consultant and drawing on 3 projects that really bring that to life. And so I really had to read the competency framework in detail, really absorb what it was trying to say, and then pick the best projects that really helped to showcase that. And because I think in tables and matrices, I actually took the free text part of that and made it a table. So this helped me, it might help others, but I essentially had the 3 projects along the top, and then I had the kind of key questions along the left-hand side, and then also the competencies at the bottom as well. So then I was able to actually map very neatly sort of both responses to how those projects contributed to the questions, but also how I was able to bring the competencies in practice. So for me, it was probably that squeezing the right content in and framing it in the right way.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think you make a really important point there about reading the criteria. And I think that's really, really useful to remind everybody that is, don't just get into the flow of free writing. How is what you're doing, as I said in the presentation, how is what you're doing relating to the criteria? How is that evidence meaningful in there? Thank you for that. Lisa, what was your experience?
I would agree with a lot of that. I think for the experienced professional submission, you have a word count of 3,000 for the whole piece, and that includes the sponsor's endorsement that's normally around 500 words. So you're condensing all of the experience that you need to demonstrate into quite a tight window. And I would say that my experience was a number of iterations of that. My first draft was probably 3 times as long as it should be. And it took lots and lots of shaving off of all the unnecessary detail. I think your point, David, about the skill of being concise is spot on. And the process really forces you to practice and hone that skill through this approach. And the other thing I would add is that I struggled a little bit with getting the balance right between the breadth of everything that you need to describe in terms of sort of introducing enough context about the examples that you're giving to explain your examples well enough to show how they meet the criteria, but without eating into your word count too much. So I think that's what's a little bit tricky about it, and took a few steps for me to refine it and get it to the right number of words. Yeah. But we got there in the end.
And I think that's really important again as well. I know some people take stance at first go, take out every other word, and if it still makes sense, you didn't do it in the first place. That's a brutalistic approach, but I know some people who try that to see if that works as a quick and dirty, if you like. But I think you're right, Lisa. It is really important to try and hone that down, because that's what we're asking you to do, isn't it? And that's again part of the criteria, really, for me. Thinking about, you've done your written submission and we talked about that. Thinking about the professional discussion now, I guess this is challenging for a lot of people, but what would you say were your biggest challenges about the professional discussion?
I'll take that one first, Alex, then, if that's okay. So for me, first of all, I would reiterate what you've said, David, about it being a very kind of friendly and conversational experience and exchange between 2 professionals, and it felt very very positive and very equal, the professional discussion there. It was really stimulating and really interesting. The thing that perhaps is a little bit tricky with that as a candidate is basically knowing how it's going, having a sense when you get towards the end of that, whether you have sort of satisfied what the assessor is looking for, because it isn't a strictly formulaic this question and this question and this question. It can be a little bit tricky to know how am I doing during that conversation. But I take your point, David, about the sort of listening to your gut feel as to whether you're showing up as your best self in that conversation and demonstrating everything that a management consultant of this level should demonstrate. But it can be a bit of a sort of, you're on a knife edge waiting for that result, as the case with any assessment, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's important, before we come to Alex for your experience, I think it's important just to remind everybody that different routes that you've come through in terms of the written submission, the professional discussion is the same for everybody. So there is no difference in the professional discussion. We treat that exactly the same way. Alex, what was your experience like?
Yeah, very similar. I'd echo those points that it was a very positive discussion, but it did it wasn't structured in the way that he sort of carried on from the points that I said and then digged a little deeper, which meant that, it's harder to plan for, but I think knowing your submission inside out. So I had it on screen and could do a quick command find, because he'd read the whole thing, and mine obviously had the evidence in the back, so it was quite lengthy, and he sort of said, oh, you've mentioned this specifically, can you elaborate? And so actually just being really confident with everything in there, and that just gives you the confidence too that he's read it, there's a real scrutiny over what you put in there, but incredibly reflective as well, lots of open questions too. So he kick-started with sort of asking, tell me the piece in your submission that you don't want me to ask you. And I thought, oh my God, these questions you can't really prepare for. Sorry, I've told everybody that one, so you might get a couple. But it's, very reflective and enjoyable at the end of it. I think that showing up, really giving it the time commitment it deserves, was something that resonated with me.
I think it's interesting that you say enjoyable, because when I went through the process, and I've gone through the process as well from both sides, when I went through the process, it was enjoyable because it was a chance to talk about me. That sounds very vain and very narcissistic, but I think it gave me an opportunity to reflect on what I had achieved, and talking to other people about it, it gave me kind of a bit more confidence. We don't get that opportunity very often, do we? We tend to forget how much difference we make, I think, to people. So that's a very valuable part of that experience. You mentioned that, Lisa, you mentioned you didn't know at the end whether you'd achieve the status or not, and there was a wait. And then the assessors are very good at not giving that away. Yeah. And I will explain the reason we do that. It's because it goes to moderation, and everybody has different days, don't they? Different things happen on different occasions, and the moderation is the backstop for that, to say yes, it's all good, or no, actually I would change this or change something else. So we don't tell you on the day, because the moderator might not agree. So we give everybody a little bit of time, and we give the assessor a time to reflect as well on the experience and say, is what I thought I heard actually what Alex said? Or did Alex say something I missed? Or did Lisa say something I didn't quite pick up on that's going to have an effect on the outcome? So we do make sure that they don't tell you on the day for that reason. Strangely, I think all of us are involved in people, in people change and that side of things. But so we've all got our own specialist area, but we see this in a lot of people. And I think the status reflects a much wider breadth of knowledge and experience than our particularly specialist areas. I guess I wanted to investigate how did you have any techniques in mind to present yourself in a broader sense, as a broader practitioner, rather than just in a particular specialist area?
Yeah, I think for me, I think with Lisa, we both work in our sort of people consulting side of the business. So a lot of the competencies actually lend themselves quite neatly to that, because it's about change management, stakeholder relationships. But actually for me, I started off with, I've got the printout even here of the competency framework, and drew myself a mega mind map of sort of what were those projects that really felt big, chunky transformation, where I was able to pick the one or two, or three in this case, that really meant that I could demonstrate those competencies most effectively. So it's combination of that breadth and depth. But I think very often, if you choose the right projects and examples of client engagements, it helps to bring out those competencies. And then really just scanning that chartered level and really circling it and saying, right, what actually have I done, making it really practical. You sort of have to elevate yourself out of the kind of minutiae of maybe what you did tactically and more about the breadth.
Yeah, I would agree, Alex. I apologise, by the way, if anyone can hear a lot of background noise. I think someone's cutting the grass outside. I'll carry on regardless. I hope it's not interfering too much. So what I would add to that, David, I appreciate what you've said about the award not being an academic one. But for me, I'm just going to close the window. Hopefully that helps. For me, having a couple of sort of theoretical anchors about consulting and what consulting means has been helpful. Not that I've necessarily referred to them in my submission, but thinking in terms of the consultancy cycle, for example, and the different sort of stages that you typically might use when you're applying management consulting as a discipline, if you like. I found that quite helpful to sort of always reorientate me. So I'm thinking as a management consultant and in that mindset rather than as a practitioner of whatever my specific discipline might be. Yeah. And I've also previously enjoyed the work of Edgar Schein, who writes about consulting, which again is not something I referred to in my submission, but it's something that's kind of in my head as a standpoint of thinking about consulting and how you be client-centered and how you focus on what the client's objectives are, the client's goals, and the process to help enable them to reach those goals. And so for me, it was referring to that, sort of having those bits of theory in my head and then keeping on asking myself as I was writing or crafting the response, sort of what does a management consultant do here? What is the management consulting element to this rather than a practitioner element?
Yeah, lovely link to CPD there as well. Thank you. Brilliant. I think that's all the main elements that I wanted to talk about. If we go back to Natasha, I think we might have some questions from the floor, as it were.
Hi, yes, we do. We will start with the pre-submitted questions. So these are the ones that we've been sent before the session actually started. So Annie has asked, how long does it take to complete the accreditation on average?
It's a very good question. I'm gonna hand over to our guests to give an example of how long they took.
So I'll describe the experienced professional kind of response, and then Alex might take your view as well. So for me, I think if I added together all of the little chunks of time that I spent developing the submission, first of all, learning about the award, understanding all the different things you need to take into consideration, and then the writing up and the preparation and the assessment and the discussion itself, it was probably about a week and a half's worth of time, I would say, assuming a sort of standard 35 to 37 hours a week approximately. So I spent about 4 days, probably 4 to 5 days writing and then refining, re-referencing back to competencies and so on. I prepared the professional discussion over about a day's worth of time. But obviously you have the flexibility to chunk these bits of time up or separate them out in little sprints, depending on how you work best, sort of personally. Yeah, I'll leave it there. How about you, Alex?
I think, yeah, I'm very much carve out the time, sit down and get in the flow of it. So I did originally start with sort of in the evenings having a look, thinking, can I write some bits? But I honestly think it requires that dedicated time. So in total, very similar to Lisa, I think a good 4 days sort of writing the submission. And then for me, because I also had the evidence, that was some additional time gathering that. So that was, both client feedback and from my peers, of course, sanitized. So yeah, it's quite a, it requires that dedication of time, but I think equally the process from the CMI point of view is quite streamlined. When you're ready to submit up to the portal, I instantly got an invite or somebody reached out rather, saying, let's book your professional discussion in, had that, and a week later I knew I was through and got my chartership. So it's quite smooth. It just requires, you taking the time out and carving it out to get pen to paper, which is the overwhelming thing, the challenging thing, to sort of think, right, how am I going to address this? But once it gets going, I think it's quite fun. It's quite reflective, really.
I would just add to that, and even though I'm in the thick of it, when I did it, I think adding all the time up, it probably took me about a week as well, and I'm deep in the woods of it. I think one thing that I often think of is, I forget if it was George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, but there's a quote that says, if I had 7 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. And I think that's really useful to bear that in mind when you're going through this process. Think about what you're going to go in there first. Don't just sit at the keyboard and start typing.
Thank you. So Frank has asked, what types of supporters do you need to verify your consulting experience for your chartership application? Clients or suppliers?
Ideally, your sponsor will be a line manager or a senior line manager. If you work in a firm, and that person can validate your submission on the basis that what you're saying is true, what you're saying is accurate, you meet the criteria in terms of the length of time that you've been operating. However, we don't all work in firms, so it's important to have another way of doing it. If you don't work in a firm, you don't have a manager, ideally it would be a mentor or a coach from your network, somebody who knows you, somebody who understands what you do, and again, somebody who can validate the work that you've done. As a very, very last resort, we can use a client, but it would be a very last resort. And I say that because part of the criteria is that you have to have a network, a network of colleagues and a network of peers, but none of us individually islands. And so, it's good to have those networks you can call on, and somebody who would validate what you have done. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. And Rola has asked, is it possible to build on past consultancy experience to complete the programme?
Yeah, do you want me to answer this, guys? Absolutely. I mean, it is. It doesn't all have to be with one firm, but what it has to be is current. So as I mentioned in the presentation, you're still using those skills, you're still using that knowledge and behaviours, and you're still operating in a way. So you can use past projects, providing that you're still doing what you say you can do. The example I gave was my first degree in IT. It's 30 years out of date, and it's not. I've not used it I've not used it this century. So let's leave that there.
That's great. Did Alex or Lisa have anything to add to that? Any top tips, or we'll move on to questions from the live audience?
No, nothing more to add. I think, the relevance of it's really important, because also when you get to the professional discussion and you ask questions about it, you really want to have it on the tip of your tongue and to think back, years ago probably isn't that easy. So,
That's great. So we have a question from Craig, who said, have we thought about providing a cut down route for people who are already chartered managers? David, you might be the key person to ask this question to.
The answer to that is a brutal no. The criteria for both statuses are different. And if you have chartered manager, that's great, and congratulations. But we still need you to demonstrate the criteria and how you meet the criteria for the Chartered Management Consultant Award.
Thank you. So our next question is, how does this relate to the CMC? Again, David, this might be for you.
Again, there is a relation in terms that people are working in the same areas, but again, you have to demonstrate how you meet the criteria and how you meet the competencies across the piece for ChMC.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find our next question, which would be great to baseline for everybody exactly how we define or qualify being a management consultant.
Alex and Lisa, do you want to have a go at this one?
I think really the competency framework is that guide and criteria. And I think it's great that we now have that, because it's very challenging when before you've got chartered accountants and everything else, and you think, well, what is a consultant? What makes a good consultant? What does good look like? And really this is the articulation of it on a page. And what I quite liked about the competency framework, because I've grown up in consulting, is that it's got that foundation applied chartered. So it really shows you, if you're not quite at chartered level, what does good look like at maybe the applied level below, and what does that route to get there. So I think for colleagues, certainly we've got a few in KPMG who have joined on a graduate scheme. They're on program in 5 years' time, they'll be getting their chartership, and they're able to really chart that route through. So yeah, the competency framework is accessible online, isn't it? You can download that now.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I agree, and I would add as well that, you know, if that's the starting point, there's also lots of other useful kind of background material that has been produced either by CMI or by MCA, such as reports that describe what's the impact of management consulting in different sectors like infrastructure, etc. And those sorts of reports, I think, provide additional useful context of what management consulting looks like and what good looks like in different contexts.
Brilliant. Thank you. Appreciate that from both of you.
Okay, that's great. Well, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. There have been a lot of discussion in the chat as well. So thank you everyone who's joined us. Thank you, David, Alex, and Lisa, for your insights and expertise. For any additional information and guidance, please contact your firm's ChMC program manager or a member of the ChMC team. You can do this using chmc@managers.org.uk, and any of the team will be happy to help you. A recording of this webinar will be made available to everyone that's booked for today's event, and you can use the link in the live chat to book on to the next session taking place on Tuesday, the 6th of July. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.